From censuses to birth and death and marriage records, as well as city directories and other sorts of records, addresses are something that we see quite a lot in the field of genealogy, but we kind of pay attention to them when they matter. That being said, I think that addresses are probably one of the best ways to help build out the story of a person's life. And in this episode, I'm going to show you some ways that you can kind of use addresses in order to maximize the potential of learning for your ancestors. And to illustrate this, I'm going to tell the story of my first cousin 3 times removed, Fayes Paul, whom I have a 50-year gap on her tree. Nevertheless, we are going to be using some addresses in order to learn the story of her life and figure out what we can about her. We start off at 223 Henry Street in Manhattan, New York, where she was born in 1897 to Abraham Paul and Esther Dezent. Now, Abraham and Esther were immigrants from the Russian Empire, and they settled in New York City and started a family. Just a few years later, in the year 1900, they were living at an apartment on Montgomery Street, a street which they would stay on for at least the next 10 years because they are on that street in the 1900, 1905, and 1910 censuses. And so we know that the family moved shortly after she was born. By 1915, they were living at 244, 246 Roebling Street in Brooklyn. At this point, Faye was already a young woman, and her family was really starting to get settled in Brooklyn. And as we can see, just a few years later, in 1920, they moved into 1037 Lafayette Avenue, a house which they purchased. Now, they would not have been able to purchase this if they hadn't already built up some savings and settled themselves into the community. So we can see here that the family was already getting situated at this address. But here is where things start to get a little bit convoluted. Because as we're about to find out, there is a big gap of time in which a huge number of unknown variables occurred. According to a tabloid newspaper, Faye was still living at that address in 1928 when a small tragedy befell her. You see, she fell in love with a man who wanted to marry her, but he did not have any money for a ring, or so he claimed. And so Faye gave him some of the money, which he took and ran away with, possibly purchasing a brand new car. And this really left her heartbroken. You know, she thought she loved this man, and he just basically betrayed her by stealing her money. Now, she had a number of other siblings. We had the oldest brother, Herman, a brother, Ira, a brother, Norman, a sister, Dorothy, who married a man named Max Goldklang, and a younger sister, Lillian Rose, who married a man named Albert Vitoff, who actually abandoned her. And it seems that this family went through a lot of strife and struggles. I was able to find a lot of newspaper articles detailing pretty intense situations and drama relating to them. So there was one instance where somebody came to take his sister's car and her brother pulled a gun on them. And it seems that the siblings were not in a very stable or close-knit relationship with one another, though some of them were, a few of them, as we're about to find out from these court documents that I was able to find. One of Faye's brothers sued the other one over some money, and this is a huge court document, which I basically skimmed through. I won't bore you with the details. It's very boring. But 2 of Faye's sisters ended up getting involved in this lawsuit as well, and they gave testimonies. As we can see, the family really reached a big split over finances, something to do with bail bonds. Faye, however, is conspicuously missing from all of this drama, and I struggled to find what exactly happened to her. And to this date, there's still almost nothing that I know about the latter part of her life, except that she eventually moved to California, married a guy with the last name of Khan, and died in 1990. And I was able to find her Social Security death index. I was able to find her California death index, and it confirms her date of birth as well as her maiden name, Paul. Now, from using the zip code on her Social Security death index, I was able to find a few addresses associated with her in West Hollywood. And unfortunately, I looked up all of these addresses to see if maybe we could find the name of her husband or anybody else living in that family, but it came up with nothing. Not a single obituary seems to exist for any of the siblings. Now, a lot of times you'll have obituaries because family members want to honor the other members of the family by talking about, all the living siblings and children and whatnot. But in this instance, if there were any obituaries for them, none of them are available publicly on sites like newspapers.com, which is really, really sad given how many siblings there are and how splintered the family unit seems to have become. Even though there's a nearly 50-year gap between the 1920s and 1970s in terms of what happened in Fayes' life, now that's a good chunk of her life, and we may never know what transpired during that time. So even with these big gaps in records, we can still learn quite a bit by paying attention to the addresses on file. Now, there are a couple of tips and tricks with regards to addresses that I just want to touch upon briefly. You may already know some of them, but I'm still going to touch upon them anyways because I've found them personally to be extremely useful when conducting research. The first of these is to make a list of all of the addresses that somebody that you're researching has lived under and put them in order from earliest to latest, specifically in the time periods that you're trying to figure out. And then what you're going to want to do is on Ancestry.com, in the keyword search function, when you're searching for documents, you can put the address in and then select the box that says exact search. And a lot of times this will help you find missing vital records that you may have not noticed. Sometimes this is because the name was spelled incorrectly or transcribed incorrectly, or maybe your ancestor or relative simply changed their last name. So there have been multiple times where through a census I was able to find where the person was living, and then I couldn't find a birth document, so I plugged the address into the keyword search function and was able to locate a missing document. You always want to keep track of these records because even outside of censuses, there are other places where addresses pop up: naturalization papers, the names of relatives on ship manifests, of course, vital documents, obituaries, other newspaper articles. You can go on newspapers.com and put in an address, and sometimes you will get an article about a family member. And oftentimes you wouldn't get this by searching for their name because it's spelled incorrectly by whoever wrote the newspaper article. You really want to pay attention to the addresses in genealogy because they are some of the best leads that you'll ever generate. And that's all genealogical research is it's accumulating a number of leads, pursuing them, and every once in a while, with a little bit of persistence and a little bit of luck, something will click. So I hope this has been very useful for you. If you have an instance where finding someone's address helped you to solve a mystery or learn something else about your family, maybe a newspaper article or a missing document, let me know in the comments section below. Also, be sure to follow me on social media. I've included links to my Instagram and my Twitter, so make sure to do that. Hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you'll be notified whenever I post new episodes. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.